When looking at Matthew Stafford, has the all-time record for the team. He has, in 2011, he threw for 5,038 yards. Welcome to Just the Stats NFL, the show that covers the NFL statistical leaders from the all-time greats to the current players leading the NFL. I'm Ernie Jennings, your host. So I'm back looking at another team from the NFC. So after covering the NFC East, I am moving on to the NFC North. So as usual, I will begin with the first place team from the division. That means we'll be taking a look at the Detroit Lions. The Lions finished the season with a record of 15 wins and 2 losses. So this tied them with the Chiefs for the best regular season record in the NFL. At home, they were 7 wins and 2 losses. On the road, 8-0. And in the division, 6-0. So interestingly, the 2 losses they had were at home. On the road, they had no losses. So in my last podcast, I looked at some of the records that NFL.com had considered unbreakable. One of them was 18 consecutive road wins by the San Francisco 49ers. And I thought that is unbreakable, and it probably is. But it is interesting that the Lions have 8 in a row, so they have 10 more to go to tie the record. They didn't win. They actually, in 2023, the previous season, they lost their last road game. So they went into they'll be going into 2025 with 8 in a row. We'll see how it goes. They have some very tough games to play on the road this season. But at least if they have to break a record, they've got 8 in a row right now. So maybe it's a possibility. But how do these Detroit Lion players of 2024 stand in relation to the greatest Lion players of all time and the greatest players in the NFL all time? Well, that's what we're going to look at right now on this episode of Just the Stats NFL. So we're going to begin with the coaches, as we always do. And I do have to say, and I said this before, but I'm just amazed, honestly. I saved the NFC kind of for last because there's a lot of teams that have been around a long time. And I made an assumption, which is a false one, that you'd see some records that would be very interesting and some longevity type things that might be pretty interesting. And so far, it really hasn't panned out so much in a lot of cases. And this is a prime example. The Detroit Lions have been around since 1930, 95 years. And yet, their winningest coach is Wayne Fontes from 1988 to 1996 with 66 wins in his entire career. He lost 67 games. George Wilson second with 53, tied with Potsy Clark. George Wilson, 1957 to 1964, and Potsy Clark, 1931 to 1940. I'm just stunned that the number one, as far as wins go, of coaches has 66 wins. That's it. So Dan Campbell now, who's been on the coaching since 2021 for the Lions, has 39 wins already. I don't see any reason. I don't see him going anywhere. I don't see him getting rid of him. He's turned this team around completely, been quite an amazing coach. I don't see any reasons he's not going to come out topping this list unless something drastic happens. I mean, they had 15 wins this past season. I don't necessarily expect him to get 15, but if they got 14, he'd be tied for second. That's how far he's on this list in 3 years. So it's just amazing. I guess, like I said, I didn't expect it. But anyway, Dan Campbell's right now in 7th place with 39 wins. But there's 3 people that have 40-something. He'll pass all of them. Whether he gets 14 wins is another question, but he doesn't need 14. He only needs 9 wins to move into 4th. And so I fully expect him to do at least that. He gets 14 wins. He's tied for 2nd all time. That's how quickly he's moving up. So in 2 years, I would expect he will be the number 1 coach in Detroit Lions history. All right, so that's the coaches. A little rant on that. Like I said, just surprised about that and the assumption I made that turned out to not be so true. All right, now when it comes to quarterbacks, which is where we're going to start this, Matthew Stafford from 2009 to 2020 had 45,109 yards passing to be the top quarterback for the Lions. And this isn't even close. Jared Goff, who's currently the quarterback, has 16,887 to be in second. Well, as you can see, just under like 29,000, 28,000 something yards behind. And I don't expect Jared Goff, because he's played other places, to pass Matthew Stafford. But the record had been held by Bobby Lane from 1950 to 1958 with 15,710. That's the record that Matthew Stafford broke. Probably broke it in 4 years. So that record had been around a long time before Matthew Stafford came on the scene. And then Jared Goff has already passed Bobby Lane as well. That is the top. Matthew Stafford leads the team. Now, when it comes to the entire history of the NFL, Matthew Stafford's coming close to moving into the top 7. I think this year we might see it happen because he's pushing 60,000 yards. Aaron Rodgers is 7th all time with 62,952. Phillip Rivers, not playing, is 63,440 yards. So it's a possibility that Matthew Stafford moves up into that range, and this could be his last year. But those are the passing yards. When we're looking at TDs, actually, I should tell, Matthew Stafford's 10th right now with 59,809 yards. I do think it shouldn't be any problem for him to pass Matt Ryan, Dan Marino, and obviously probably not Aaron Rodgers, because Aaron Rodgers is going to move up the list. But it's a possibility that he could move all the way into 6th. Matthew Stafford, that is. All right, but that's the quarterbacks. And when it comes to yardage, when we're looking at touchdowns, Matthew Stafford again, obviously, with 282 touchdowns. Bobby Lane's 2nd right now with 118, and Jared Goff has 115. So this season, we'll see Jared Goff move into 2nd all-time in Detroit Lions history when it comes to touchdown passes. And then when we're looking at interceptions, Matthew Stafford has 144 interceptions. Bobby Lane has 142 to lead the Lions. And this is a category where Jared Goff is way down. He's 15th. He only has 39 interceptions on a lot fewer yards thrown and passes made, but way back. Like I always say, Matthew Stafford had 144 interceptions at a 2.3% rate that he threw interceptions, whereas Bobby Lane, who had 142, was throwing an interception at a 6.5%, so 3 times the rate almost than Matthew Stafford. Now, the last category we'll look at is sacks. Now, this is, again, Matthew Stafford. 385 times he's been sacked, or he was sacked for the Detroit Lions. Greg Landry's 2nd. From 1968 to 1978, he was sacked 267 times. So he's the 2nd highest for the Detroit Lions. And again, they've done quite a good job with Jared Goff in the years he's been there. He's 9th right now, but he's been sacked 119 times. So probably more than he'd like, and he's somebody you do definitely have to protect. When it comes to being sacked, like I said, Matthew Stafford leads the team with 385 sacks. In his career, he has 502 currently, which puts him 8th all time. There's only 8 quarterbacks that have been sacked at least 500 times at this point. He'll probably pass John Elway and Brett Favre. Probably that's as far as he gets. John Elway's 7th with 516 and Brett Favre's 6th with 525. So it's likely that he'll at least pass Elway and probably Brett Favre. So that's our quarterbacks. Let's look at the running backs now, see how they fare. Of course, Detroit Lions had one of the greatest of all time in Barry Sanders. So unlike the coaches, they've had a great quarterback in Matthew Stafford, and then running back Barry Sanders. Barry Sanders played from 1989 to 1998. He racked up 15,269 yards. He's one of my favorite running backs. So he's 4th all-time in rushing yards with that total. And if you're a Lions fan, you know he just decided to retire, hang it up. Not because of injury, really, just decided to made that decision. But I honestly believe if he'd hung around, it wouldn't be Emmitt Smith who would be number 1 in the NFL all time. It'd be Barry Sanders. I mean, he was that good. Just incredible, so fun to watch as a running back. But he has a huge lead. There's nobody even close. Billy Sims is 2nd from 1980 to 1984 with 5,106 yards. So he's got a 3 times the top running back currently on the team. Well, actually, currently on the team is Jahmyr Gibbs. Now, he's been quite good and one of the best running backs now playing. And in 2 years, he's already got 2,357 yards to be 16th. And he has another 1,000-yard season. He can easily move all the way to 6th. So in just probably 4 years, he'll be number 2 all time. And if they can get him signed to a second contract, there's a chance that he would be the one player who could, down the road, catch Barry Sanders. But that's how good Jahmyr Gibbs is. Quite a good player, too. And then, of course, you got David Montgomery with 1,790 yards, been on the team also since 2023. Those two are the best probably in the entire NFL, and not even probably, they are the best 1-2 combo running backs in the NFL. So those are current players we'll be watching. All right, let's look at touchdowns when it comes to touchdowns. And Barry Sanders, there's 9 players who have rushed for 100 or more touchdowns. Barry Sanders, when he retired, had 99, one off that list. So he's 10th. But he has 99. Billy Sims, again, 42 is second best. Now, here's where David Montgomery shines and Jahmyr Gibbs. Gibbs is 6th with 26, and David Montgomery's 7th with 25. They'll easily move all the way to 4th. Dutch Clark from 1931 to 1938 had 36 touchdowns. So it's a possibility. Jahmyr Gibbs needs 10 to tie, 11 to pass him. So I think it's very possible he can move to up to 3rd. Same with David Montgomery. One of them, I wouldn't doubt one of them does it. Probably not both move into 3rd, but we'll see. Again, they're moving up the list, but it's a long ways between them and Barry Sanders in first place. All right, let's see and again, when we look at receivers, again, Detroit has one of the greatest all-time wide receivers in history, and that is Calvin Johnson, who played from 2007 to 2015. He had 11,619 yards in his career. And when we look at his receptions, he also led the team with 731 receptions, which isn't as high as many players. But again, he retired. Didn't have as long as career as some of the leading wide receivers, but he was a great player. And we'll see that when it comes to single season. And also, he had one of the single games with the most receiving yards in a single game. And actually it was, if you didn't count overtime, he would have had the record. We count overtime, he's second highest total. But he had 731 receptions. Second was Herman Moore from 1991 to 2001. He had 670. Johnny Morton from 1994 to 2001 had 469. And then you have already only been on the team since 2021, Amon-Ra St. Brown, 430 receptions. Well, he'll easily move to third. He won't make it any farther than that. He's going to need at least 2 years probably to catch Herman Moore. But he's well on his way to probably being the number one receiver for the Detroit Lions. When it comes to running backs, Barry Sanders is the all-time leader in that category of receiving with 352 receptions. That's seventh for their Lions. And then Charlie Sanders from 1968 to 1977 as a tight end had 336 receptions to lead all tight ends. So, again, this is a team, you see some teams where tight ends are number way at the top, and tight ends for the Lions have not been used in the same way as some other teams might have. All right. Then, like I said, let's look at the yards again. Calvin Johnson with 11,619. Second was Herman Moore again with 9,174. Now, Amon-Ra St. Brown is fourth in receptions, but he's sixth in yards with 4,851. If he has his typical 1,000-yard season, he'll definitely move into fourth. He'd have to have 1,600 yards, almost 17, to move into third. So that may not happen. It's going to be a few years before he gets anywhere beyond third spot, but he's definitely on his way. He could be another one of the greats. Obviously, time will tell. And touchdowns, receiving. Again, very close. Calvin Johnson had 83. Herman Moore had 62. And again, there's a huge drop-off. Marvin Jones from 2016 to 2023 had 36. It's a big drop-off. Now, Amon-Ra St. Brown is in seventh spot. He has 33. So he'll definitely move up into third place. And then it's going to be a while before he catches the second place and first place spots. But we will see him move right up the list. So that will be fun to watch. All right. Let's look at the defense and career-wise. We'll start with interceptions. Dick LeBeau, one of the greatest of all time as far as interceptions go. In fact, he was 10th all-time in the NFL. He had 62 interceptions from 1959 to 1972. 62. Lem Barney from 1967 to 1977 had 56. So they had 5 years overlapping. So that would have been quite a pair of cornerbacks, right and left cornerbacks that would have been out there for the quarterbacks to have to play against. But those are the top two. And again, when you're looking at today's players, Kirby Joseph, been on the team since 2022, has 17. And what's interesting about that is we'll see that later when we come to single seasons, how well he did to get to 17. But he's leading right now with 17. That puts him at 20th on the team. I'll tell you what, he could move quite a bit up the list if he had 9 more. But I don't expect him to get 9 interceptions this next season, but we'll see what happens. So like I said, Dick LeBeau led the team, which put him at 10th all-time in the NFL. Now, when we're looking at tackles for loss, Ndamukong Suh had 66 tackles for loss, and Sean Rogers from 2001 to 2007 had 65. Those are your two players with tackles for losses. And Suh was from 2010 to 2014, so not even that long of a time. He had 66 tackles for loss. Pretty impressive in such a short period of time. Those are your top two. And currently, Aiden Hutchinson, who's only been around since 2022, already has 30. So if he can stay healthy, he should move up this list pretty quickly. I mean, so he'll be fun to watch. But he's leading the team right now as far as that category goes. And Aleem McNeil, also on the team, but he's a little farther down. He's been on the team since 2021. He has 22 tackles for loss, which isn't really enough. And we'll see when we look at the tackles for loss numbers. There's bigger numbers you should be able to get in a single season. And then we look at the last category as far as defense all time. Alex Karras, famous player for the team, from 1958 to 1970 had 100. The only player on the team with more than, well, at least 100 sacks. He has 100 exactly. Only player. 1970, it's been that long. No one's broken this record for 55 years. It's incredible considering how dominating some of the sack leaders are, the more current players. Aiden Hutchinson's 20th right now on the team. He's only got 28 and a half. So it's going to be a while before he gets too far up this list. He won't make the top 10 unless he had a 20 sack season, which I guess is possible. It definitely is possible, but unlikely. But we'll watch him. All right. That is the defense, and that is the career players. So let's look at single season. We'll go back to the quarterbacks and look at in a single season. Of course, this is going to be Matthew Stafford primarily. When looking at Matthew Stafford, has the all-time record for the team. He has, in 2011, he threw for 5,038 yards. That's an amazing total. In fact, it's the 14th all-time most yards in a single season. Only 15 times has a quarterback thrown for over 5,000 yards. So he just made it over. Peyton Manning holds a record with 5,477, which he did in 2013, which he broke the record Drew Brees had set in 2011. So in the same year that Matthew Stafford threw for just over 5,000 yards, Drew Brees was setting the record with 5,476 yards for the New Orleans Saints in a single season. And at the same time, Tom Brady, who's fifth in 2011, threw for 5,235 yards. So, like I said, 15 times it's happened where a quarterback's thrown for 5,000 yards. And I say it that way because Drew Brees has been on the list 5 times. The only one on the list 5 times. I mean, Tom Brady been on it only twice. But he did it 5 times. So it's incredible that 15 times it's happened, 3 of them in 1 year. Quite amazing, really. Drew Brees did it 3 years in a row. So pretty incredible to throw for 5,000 plus yards 3 years in a row. But Matthew Stafford, 5,038 yards. In 2012, he came right back and threw for 4,967 yards. So those are the top 2. Now, just this past year, Jared Goff threw for 4,629 yards. Pretty good. In fact, put him second, only behind Joe Burrow, who threw for 4,918 yards. So very impressive season for Jared Goff. When we're looking at touchdowns all time, again, it's Matthew Stafford, who threw for 41 touchdowns in 2011, the same year he had the 5,000 yards. And again, Jared Goff, though, is second. And just this past season, he threw for 37 touchdowns, which was his highest. 37 touchdowns puts him fourth in the NFL last season, behind Joe Burrow again, who had 43. And Baker Mayfield and Lamar Jackson had 41. So Jared Goff ended up fourth as far as touchdowns go. So very impressive season for Jared Goff. And when we're looking at interceptions, all time for the Detroit Lions' most interceptions, Bobby Lane in 1951 threw 23 interceptions. Later on, he was tied for Jeff Comlow in 1979, who threw for 23. Those are the top two. So that record's been around for quite a long time, 74 years. And it won't get broken this year. Not by Goff, that's for sure. I mean, Goff is one of the better quarterbacks. So like Jared Goff had 37 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. That's a 3-to-1 ratio. That's really impressive. He only threw 12 interceptions this past season, which doesn't put him up at fourth, but for the amount of yards he threw, it's not terrible. 2.2% rate of interceptions is pretty good, really good, really. All right, how many times has a quarterback been sacked? John Kitna in 2006, 63 times was sacked in a single season. That's rough. That's good enough, actually, to put him sixth all time in the NFL for most sacks in a single season. Beat out David Carr had the most in 2002 when he was sacked 76 times. Quite a lot of sacks in a single season. Now, this past season, Jared Goff was sacked 31 times. While at the very same time, this past season, it was Caleb Williams for Chicago was sacked 68 times. So more than double Jared Goff's total. Caleb Williams was first with 31. Jared Goff was way down at 16th. And he's a quarterback that really does need that protection to throw the way he is. He's not a scrambler. He's not going to be running around and getting away. So he definitely needs the protection, and he got it last season. We'll see how this season goes. All right, let's look at the running backs. And again, they have some great running backs on the team currently, but the way they do it with this tandem team, it does in some way hinder one of them dominating in a way. But Barry Sanders holds the record for the most rushing yards in a single season. In 1997, he had 2,053 yards rushing. And in fact, Barry Sanders holds the top 7 spots. Now, this past season, Jamar Gibbs came in at 9th all-time in Detroit Lion history with 1,412 yards. So pretty impressive. And in fact, Jamar Gibbs had 1,412 yards, and David Montgomery had 775 yards. So between them, almost had 2,200 yards just between the two of them. And we're looking at the entire NFL with that yardage. Of course, it was Saquon Barkley for Philadelphia who had 2,005 yards. But Jamar Gibbs comes in 5th all time, not all time, but in 2024 with 1,412 yards. Not bad. I mean, he had Barkley and Henry just way ahead of anybody else, 400 to 500 yards higher than the third place spot. But Jamar Gibbs had a tremendous season. And when we look at touchdowns all time for the Detroit Lions, Jamal Williams in 2022, not that long ago, had 17 touchdowns in a single season, beating out Barry Sanders, who in 1991 had 16. This past season, Jamar Gibbs had 16, so he came pretty close to setting the record for most touchdowns in a single season, one off the record, right up there with Barry Sanders. What's fascinating is David Montgomery came in 9th all-time for Detroit Lions. He had 12. So between them, that's incredible. They had 28 touchdowns, which, by the way, would only be enough to tie them with LaDainian Tomlinson, who had 28 touchdowns in a single season to set the NFL record. So that just tells you how great LaDainian Tomlinson had that season in 2006. But Jamar Gibbs this past season tied Derrick Henry and James Cook for most touchdowns in the NFL. So really good season. 16. They all had 16 touchdowns. All right. Let's move on to the receivers. And as we've already talked about, Amon-Ra St. Brown moving up the list. But he led the team with 115 receptions, a big distance over Sam Laporta, tight end, who had 60, and Jamison Williams, who had 58. Jamar Gibbs and David Montgomery were the 4th and 5th spot last season. Jamar Gibbs, as a running back, led the team with 52 receptions, and Montgomery had 36. Really tells you if one of those two gets hurt, what kind of numbers would Gibbs put up if Montgomery's hurt and vice versa. Obviously, most people think Gibbs would put up much bigger numbers than Montgomery, but still, they're both really good players. All right, and when we're comparing the numbers that Amon-Ra St. Brown had this past season with 115, and we compare it to all-time record, he's close. He didn't quite get to what he had last year, but Herman Moore in 1995 had 123 receptions, the most by a Detroit Lion player. Calvin Johnson was second in 2012. He had 122. And then Brown in 2023 had 119, and then this past season he had 115. So he's just right at the door of setting the record. I think it's very possible he can set the record and pass the 123 by Herman Moore. I really do think he has that ability. He's a great wide receiver. But with his 115 receptions, that put him second this past season, only behind Jamar Chase from Cincinnati, who had 127 receptions. So he really had quite a season. We're talking about yards all time. Well, it's Calvin Johnson who had the incredible season in 2012. When he had those 122 receptions, he had 1,964 yards. That's really pushing the total. In fact, that total is all-time number one for most yards in a single season. No, you heard Hill talking about a few years ago breaking 2,000 yards. No one's broke 2,000 yards. Calvin Johnson came the closest with 1,964 yards in 2012. That's the best by the team. Now, Brown has the 4th best in 2023 when he had 1,515 yards. So that's his best so far. Obviously, he's capable of even getting higher. Now, this past season, even though he only had 4 less receptions, he was farther down in yardage. He had 1,263 yards, but he only averaged 11 yards a catch versus the year when he had 1,500 yards, he had 12.7 yards. The reason Calvin Johnson set this record on 122 receptions is he averaged 16.1 yards per reception. So very impressive. But when we're looking at yards this past season, Jamar Chase again had 1,708. Brown ended up fifth with his 1,263. So a good season, one of the top. And again, if you're in fantasy football, he's going to be one of the early wide receivers. He won't be the top 3 or so, but he will be right there in the top 5 being picked. The Lions last season, like I said, Brown led the team with 1,263 yards, but Jamison Williams just passed the 1,000-yard mark as well. He had 1,001 yards. So you had 2 wide receivers getting 1,000 yards. Sam Laporta, as a tight end, led the team in tight ends with 726, and Jamar Gibbs, as a running back, led the running backs with 517 yards. So very impressive. Jamison Williams was 24th, so the Lions had 2 players with 1,000-plus yards. Really a good season. All right. Now, when we're looking at the defense, we see that we'll start with interceptions. And all-time greatest was Jack Christensen in 1953. He had 12 interceptions, and Don Dahl in 1950 had 12. Those were the top 2. Don Dahl also in 1949, he had 11. So the very next year he broke his record by 1 and had 12. Pretty incredible. Now, like I was saying, when it comes to that category, Kirby Joseph this past season had 9 interceptions. That's an impressive number of interceptions. Let's look at that. Behind him, Brian Branch had 4, but the 9 interceptions was really... He led the NFL, by the way. That's what I was looking at here, was looking at the NFL's numbers as far as interceptions go. And, he led the NFL with 9 interceptions. Xavier McKinney from Green Bay had 8. But 9 interceptions, that's an incredible amount of interceptions. So he has a good chance of moving up the list of all-time career-wise interception leaders on the team if he keeps this up. But, you don't see this 2 years in a row normally. You won't see him with 9 next year. I mean, if he's that good, they won't be throwing in his direction as much as they were. So we'll just see how that goes. But really impressive by this young man. All right, tackles for loss. Well, it's Sue. He had 21 tackles for loss. That's the most by far by any Detroit Lion. There's 3 players that had 17. In 2014, he had 21 tackles for loss. And that's impressive. This is an area where the Lions need some improvement. Brian Branch had 8 tackles for loss. No one had double digits. I expect to see Hutchinson with double digits. He had 7. He only played 5 games. He had 7. So, you triple that. If he plays 15 games at the same rate, he's got 21 tackles for loss, which would tie him for the all-time record of Sue. So a healthy Hutchinson who plays the entire season, you should see him up there right around the record level. Last season with 8, that was really way down the list. Myles Garrett for Cleveland had 22 to lead the NFL. 8, they really do need some improvement. That put him all the way. Brian Branch was tied for 75th. That's a lot of players, more than one per team, that are getting better tackles for loss numbers. Now, when it comes to sacks, again, it was very bad. Hutchinson played 5 games, led the team with 7.5 sacks. He only played 5 games, 7.5 sacks. This is the area which it did, I think, cost the Lions a Super Bowl shot. They had so many players on defense hurt. I mean, their defense was just couldn't keep players on the field, and for long length of time. Like I said, Hutchinson played 5 games. The next best, Smith, who had 4 sacks, played 7 games, started 7 games. I mean, they just didn't have players on defense. So their offense was great, one of the best all time, averaging well over 30 points a game. But they had to score that many because the defense was just racked with injury. So getting all these players back, and that leads us to kind of wrapping this up all together. That gets us to looking at the Detroit Lions for the 2025 season. So when we're looking at them, the odds makers have them at 10.5 wins. Well, if they can't get to 10 wins, that 10.5 wins, which would actually be 11, I'd be shocked. Do they get to 15 wins? I doubt it. Honestly, they have a very tough schedule, but I still think they're going to win their division. They have the second toughest schedule, but then you compare that with the fact that they're getting their defense back. They should have a healthier defense, which should make a big difference. Now, it is true they've lost quite a few offensive and defensive coaches, more than normal. I mean, they lost their offensive coordinator to the Bears, and they've lost defensive coordinator. So they have new coaches in a lot of positions. So new coaches, tougher schedule, that could be a problem. But on the other hand, like I said, a defense that hopefully has overcome the injuries that they've had could make a huge difference. So do they get to 15 wins? I don't think so, but I still think, despite being in a division that's very tough, I still think they come out on top and win the division. And if they do, I think they have a good shot at the Super Bowl. If you play in a tough division and you can make it through, and if they can just have a little bit better luck as far as injury bug goes, they have a shot. As good a shot as anybody else, I think. So that's my take on the Detroit Lions. Next episode, we'll get to the second place team. But I appreciate you listening. Please like this and subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, you can get me at Facebook, X, or Instagram at Just the Stats NFL. So I appreciate you listening, and that is a wrap for this episode of Just the Stats NFL. So until next time, I am out.